From 1968 to 1982, Dick Cavett played host on ABC and PBS to many of the nation's top personalities.
Since he was 18 years old, Dick Cavett has been plagued by depression. In those days, mental illness was referred to as a slump at Yale. In 1980, the most brilliant talk show presenter in the United States had a breakdown while traveling. The guy who interviewed famous people and presidents eventually needed shock treatment. He would not have survived without it. As he died on the inside, he could grin for the camera. After overcoming a stroke and years of internal struggles, Cavett is now in his 70s and must face yet another unforeseen adversary. Born into a sleepy Nebraska hamlet, Dick Cavett spent his formative years immersed in the world of education. Both of his parents were teachers, and they were on the move all the time until they landed in Lincoln. There, Cavett started to grasp the significance of words, the value of inquiry, and the nuanced skill of listening. Rather than being an external location, school was an integral part of his formative years. A school was eventually named after Cavett's parents, but the greatest homage was the way he lived his life in accordance with their principles. Then, a dramatic shift occurred. His mother passed away from cancer when Cavett was only 10 years old. Injuries were severe. She appeared one day and vanished the next. That type of hurt doesn't go away. It becomes a part of you. It heightened Cavett's awareness, sensitivity, and humanity. Later on, his humanity shone through when he sat across from his talk show guests. People felt comfortable enough to open up to him to share things they hadn't done before because he listened as well as spoke. Prior to his fame as a public speaker, Cavett was already a performer. He immersed himself in magic as a youth. Not just casual card tricks, but serious, rehearsed illusions. He began making money from concerts by the time he was 16. He met a young magician named Carson, had a mentor, competed, and won prizes. They had no idea at the time that their paths would intersect and influence the course of late-night television. Cavett possessed not just a keen intellect and deft hand with the cards, but also impressive physical strength. He won gold at the state level while gymnast at Lincoln High. He continued to practice discipline and pay close attention to detail. In addition to running a radio program and acting in plays, he was elected president of the Student Council. As a summer caddy before he graduated from middle school, he had the opportunity to mingle with individuals from a more ostentatious and affluent background, but they were all still human. All of these things contributed to his eventual maturity. Things became more difficult once he arrived at Yale. Not only was the workload heavy, but so were the emotions. Despite exhibiting symptoms of sadness, he persisted. Initially, he focused on English, but then shifted his focus to theater. A member of the radio station and a stage actor, he carved out a niche for himself in the entertainment industry. Just to observe how things worked, he would sneak into New York City TV studios on weekends and act like he was an employee. He has his sights set on a loftier goal. He worked as a copy boy at Time magazine, a shop investigator, and a typist after graduating, all the while dreaming of a career in show business. After that, the turning point arrived. Cavett learned that Jack Paar wanted assistance with joke writing for his program when he was still employed as a low-paid copy boy. As a result, he took a risk and gave Paar 20 jokes while riding the elevator. During that night's live television broadcast, Paar utilized them. In an instant, Cavett moved from being an unknown insider at Time to a staff writer earning 10 times his previous wage, all because the crowd erupted in laughter. It was the beginning of a legend, not just a career break, that happened on that elevator journey. After penning jokes for Jack Paar and Carson, he became an indelible part of television history. Behind the scenes, he became famous for crafting opening monologues and shaping the tone of late-night humor. He once trailed Groucho Marx several blocks simply to chat, after meeting him at a funeral. After that risky deed, he became friends with Groucho, Carson, and Parr, all of whom trusted in him. All three of comedy's heavy hitters trusted Cavett as he learned the ropes. He was so good at his job as Tonight Show talent supervisor that he could spot potential stars before everyone else. Even when others were hesitant, he went ahead and hired Woody Allen, Barbra Streisand, and the Rolling Stones. She was just 19 years old. At some point, he made the decision to emerge from hiding. He had his first stand-up comedy performance in 1964 to an almost vacant room. Despite his nerves, the laughter flowed freely. His audience-pleasing, sharp, dry, incisive humor was his voice. "Go to a Chinese-German restaurant" was one of his finest lines. He played low-paying gigs in San Francisco and Chicago, met Lenny Bruce, and eventually became famous. Yet, after an hour, you're still yearning for power. He appeared in advertisements, game programs, and discussion shows. Another turning point came when he was cast on The Ed Sullivan Show. No one could have predicted that Dick Cavett would cause a stir on late-night television. At his first appearance in front of the camera, he was neither ostentatious nor renowned. His first guest on his ABC morning talk show, which aired on March 4, 1968, was Buckminster Fuller. For years, Cavett had worked behind the scenes, penning jokes for Johnny Carson and others. And suddenly, he was the one in the spotlight. Unfortunately, the morning slot wasn't a good fit for his analytical tone. Fans were hoping for a more upbeat, energetic breakfast show. When ABC saw this, they didn't just let him go quietly. They made a shocking move towards the end of 1969, pitting Cavett against Carson in the late-night conflict. It was daring, it was precarious, and it paid off. The shy, brilliant Nebraskan with a Yale degree, Cavett, found himself unexpectedly in a position of prominence, and he wasted no time seizing it. He was unafraid to risk ridicule or play it safe. Guests he invited prompted deep contemplation. Cavett went for profundity, while Carson went for comedy. That was his distinguishing feature. His interviews came across as more natural, inquisitive chats than anything else he did. Instead of asking famous people about their latest films, he probed them about their values, shortcomings, and uncertainties. Many participated. Notable celebrities who often shunned chat programs agreed to appear on Cavett's show. On his stage, the very reserved Katharine Hepburn opened up. The volatile and aggressive Marlon Brando opted to speak about Native American rights on Cavett's show. He then proceeded to attack a photographer. In addition to his incredible performances, Jimi Hendrix also spoke about his craft in a way that had never been heard before. These were genuine experiences, not just PR stops. In the background, Cavett's crew shifted like a chessboard, positioning visitors to provoke discussion rather than merely applause. Cavett did something unprecedented in the early 1970s, long before the Vietnam War ended. He brought two young men who had served in the war but had opposing views on national television. Neither of them were actors nor politicians. John O'Neill argued in favor of the war, whereas John Kerry opposed it. The suspense was palpable. The White House was rocked by Richard Nixon's wrath as millions of people watched. Nixon was subsequently caught on secret tapes saying, "Is there a way we can get even with Cavett?" It was only one TV interview that had that kind of impact. However, Cavett persisted. No filters, no stage presence, simply the unfiltered truth of combat brought to American living homes when he once welcomed a crippled soldier in a wheelchair. That had never been seen on television before. A whole documentary was produced by PBS to recognize Cavett's work during that time, years later. Even when nobody was listening, he made sure people's voices were heard. It was about more than simply battle. Right away, Cavett dove into the most contentious topics of the day: including racism, Watergate, and gun control. Cavett interviewed segregationist politician Lester Maddox instead of other hosts who focused on Hollywood rumors. As the dispute escalated, Maddox abruptly left the stage. A Randy Newman song's first stanza was based on that exact scenario. Also, when he met with James Baldwin, Cavett did more than ask questions. He allowed Baldwin enough opportunity to respond. After the assassination of Robert F. Kennedy, Cavett ripped up his segment script and ushered in a real discussion about gun control. John Lennon and Jane Fonda, two anti-establishment stalwarts, were among the persons he signed. Even if it angered conservatives, Cavett wouldn't care. Nixon's staff despised it because they wanted liberal intellectuals like Cavett removed from the air. But what the audience saw was a fearless questioner. He also made late-night television a platform for creatives, intellectuals, and authors. Cavett remained in New York and hosted literary greats like Norman Mailer and Truman Capote, while Johnny Carson was entertaining in California. He went so far as to team Capote with Groucho Marx one night for the sake of experimentation. On a separate occasion, the surrealist Salvador Dali appeared on the broadcast, transforming it from a chat show into something more akin to a dream. Cavett never hurried them. Instead, he gave them space to explore, disagree, and surprise one another. This Cavett performance wasn't only about politics and serious thought, though. At times, it crossed over into the fantastical. Health food pioneer Jerome Rodale made a bold declaration on Cavett's stage in 1971 that he intended to live to the 100th year of his life. A few moments after that, he fell to his seat and passed away from a heart attack. Even though the recording never made the broadcast, word of it spread like wildfire. People continue to claim, despite no such evidence, that they witnessed it on television. According to Cavett, this is a common occurrence, erroneous recollections stemming from a shock. Guests who acted irrationally were next. The inebriated appearance of Peter Falk, Ben Gazzara, and John Cazale was a notorious incident in one episode. Cavett became so frustrated that he stormed off his performance after trying to keep the concert going. The interview with transsexual activist Christine Jorgensen, whom he had interviewed before, became too intimate, and she abruptly ended the session. In an effort to break the awkward pause, Cavett stared into the camera. The label of the thinking person's talk show host persisted with Cavett, even though he never surpassed Carson in the ratings. Instead of acting ignorant, pandering, or asking predetermined questions, he listened attentively, probed perceptively, and remained silent when necessary. The likes of Katharine Hepburn, Marlon Brando, and Laurence Olivier, actors who would typically shun television, were drawn to it because of its manner. Although Cavett did not make it easy for Brando, he made it worthwhile, so the actor, who is notorious for dodging interviews, praised him as the finest. It wasn't due to Cavett's lack of skill that ABC canceled The Dick Cavett Show in 1974. Network management felt the program was too cerebral for the typical viewer, despite the show's critical acclaim and Emmy nominations. Cavett was immediately eliminated. In fact, he began a new chapter that would take him across almost every major American television network, rather than vanishing altogether. He tried his hand at a Saturday night variety program on CBS in 1975. The show didn't last for very long, but it did get his name out there. Things began to click again in 1977 when he discovered a better match at PBS. Cavett felt free to delve deeply into discussions of politics and culture without the interference of commercial sponsors. He remained there for 5 years, during which time he dared to ask hosts more perceptive questions. He continued to move after that run stopped. He left ABC for the USA Network in 1985, but made an unexpected comeback for a late-night appearance on the network in 1986. From 1989 until 1996, he was a fixture at CNBC, where his insightful interviews distinguished themselves from the norm of tabloid television. Cavett remained true to his roots by airing interviews with real-life public leaders, authors, singers, and intellectuals, rather than following the glitz and glamour of other talk programs. He was aiming to channel Dick Cavett, rather than Johnny Carson. Brains over buzz was the message. Cavett had a dual career as a writer and presenter. His 2010 book, Talk Show, was an esoteric mix of tales, humor, and drama from behind the scenes. From Bette Davis to Groucho Marx, Richard Nixon, and John Lennon. He was friends with them all. His opinions on American politics and life as a youngster, his fascination with magic, and his Nebraska upbringing were all laid bare in the book. Even though his views caused some controversy, such when he defended Don Imus amid a big scandal, Cavett never cared. His tongue was keen and his thinking even sharper. In spite of his lack of television appearances, Cavett continued to make surprise appearances. His previous interviews were revived in films like Apollo 13 and Forrest Gump, and he even did voice work for The Simpsons. He made an appearance at a posh party in 2012's Gossip Girl, and was an actor on HBO's Vinyl. Cavett even had a Broadway gig in the early 2000s, narrating the musical The Rocky Horror Show. He was present on the night of the historic punch-in between Marlon Brando and a paparazzi following a taping of The Dick Cavett Show, which is an odd footnote to history. After a long hiatus, Cavett returned to his roots in his latter work for Turner Classic Movies in 2006 and 2007. In this capacity, he exposed a new audience to his renowned interviews, which he had with movie greats like Groucho Marx and Katharine Hepburn, and provided background information for each. Not only was this nostalgic, but it was also educational. Watergate, Dick Cavett's show that established a major platform for political discourse, was shown by PBS in 2014. The fact that Nixon sought out a means to screw Cavett on a now infamous White House recording demonstrates that Cavett's influence extended well beyond talk shows. Nixon despised the show. Even though he never showed it, he was powerful. Also, Cavett discovered a fresh perspective in print. Brief Encounters, a collection of his blog posts for the New York Times, catapulted him into the role of cultural critic. He dared to speak up on topics like politics, mental health, and the absurdities of contemporary life. In an era when the majority of people chose to remain silent about depression, he wrote honestly and rawly about his struggle. Even in his political commentary, when he satirized generals, pundits, and everyone else who irritated him, his writing possessed a grace that belied its candor. Featuring musical allusions to artists such as Mort Saul and Leonard Bernstein, it was never only tirades. At the same time, something clicked for Dick Cavett and Carrie when they met in a Yale theater class. Her reputation in the theater was already well established, while he was still a freshman in college. Spending more and more time together became second nature to them. Their onstage collaboration in productions such as Anti-Mame and Charlie's Aunt was more than simply a romantic relationship. Their performances were a reflection of the camaraderie they had offstage. Their 1964 New York City wedding was the beginning of their inseparable marriage. Industry insiders saw parallels between them and the dynamic duo of Mel Brooks and Anne Bancroft. Carrie was more outspoken and bright, while Dick was the cynic. The two of them were a great complement to one another. Following their time at Yale, they immersed themselves in Williamstown, Massachusetts, summer theater. Chasing acting opportunities and celebrating minor victories, they were penniless, but madly in love. One anecdote sums up their friendship perfectly. When Dick needed an engagement ring but didn't have the cash on hand, he spent 2 weeks sweating in sawdust and heavy timber in a lumber yard. all the while attempting not to blend in with the other legitimate workers. Just to see Carrie perform, he would clean up and head straight to her concert every night. The fact that this Yale student was putting himself through all that trouble for the sake of an engagement ring was unbelievable to everyone at the Yard. Though little in comparison to other famous engagement rings, this one had significance. It was earned, not purchased. All the love and work they put into their relationship was summed up in that sacrifice. After 42 years of marriage, a turning point occurred. Carrie passed away at the age of 69 from lung cancer in 2006. Suddenly, the eerie quiet in their Manhattan flat sounded like a wall of sound to Dick. It was more than simply sad. Losing her was confusing. His struggle with depression had begun during his undergraduate days. The addition of bereavement only made it worse. Making coffee and sitting in a peaceful room were both little reminders that she was gone. He began to write more often, channeling his sorrow into essays for the New York Times. It was helpful, to some extent. Strangest of all was how their Montauk home had foretold this suffering. Tick Hall was the name given to the picturesque seaside home that dates back to the 18th century. It had been their refuge from city life since they purchased it in the 1960s, but it burnt down in 1997. It was just the chimney that made it. Not like them. Most people would have just ignored it. "You can't put a person back together with a house," Carrie observed, yet that's precisely what they accomplished. Reconstructing it to its original specifications took 4 years. After her death, the home, which stood as a symbol of resiliency, was preserved in glass and wood as a memento. After years of attempting, Dick managed to sell it in 2021. It was never primarily about the money, even if the price plummeted from $62 million to $23.6 million before it sold. Dick accomplished the unthinkable 4 years after his heartbreak with Carrie. He fell head over heels for love all over again. He wed novelist Martha Rogers when he was 74 years old. They had a little ceremony in New Orleans and kept everything under wraps. Dick became a stepfather for the first time when Martha brought 2 children into the marriage. They uprooted to the artistic, colonial-era town of Ridgefield, Connecticut. It was inconveniently located far from the water and Tick Hall, yet it met all of his requirements. His friends claim that Martha restored his happiness. Books, thoughts, and historic homes were all things she and he loved. A unique type of hideaway. Apart from Montauk, yet rich in history, their house was constructed in 1812. In 1954, Dick Cavett departed from Nebraska for Yale University at the tender age of 18. Little did he know that the true test lay not in his studies, but in the shadows and stillness that resided within him. In everyday speech, the term depression did not exist back then. A freshman's slump or letdown was the common term. However, Cavett's experience was more than mere homesickness. It persisted and rendered even the most mundane tasks seem insurmountable. According to what he told afterward, suicides occurred annually at schools like Princeton, but Yale managed to avoid that destiny. Yet, an invisible weight burdened him. He made a joke about how this was happening before drugs were popular, so it was unusual that they hadn't spread to colleges yet. He was able to graduate because the weight lifted slightly, but it never truly went away. For the remainder of his life, it accompanied him. Cavett was already a famous actor by 1975 when he had just graduated from college. His discussion program catapulted him to fame. Off camera, he was crumbling once again. But on camera, he was making people laugh by interviewing luminaries. He was 39 years old, and the despair was returning worse than before. Dr. Nathan Klein, an early advocate for the use of drugs to treat mental illness, was his go-to doctor this time. Although it did not solve all of his problems, the medication that Klein offered him allowed him to feel more normal again. That wasn't the last of him, though. He kept working and smiling on TV. Simply put, It was a halt. We still hadn't seen the breakdown in action. That was in 1980. At the age of 44, Cavett was seated aboard a Concorde aircraft, preparing for departure, when suddenly, something broke. He perspired profusely, became restless, and was removed off the aircraft. Not long after that, he was lying in a hospital bed. Electroconvulsive treatment, or ECT, was recommended by his doctors. That phrase conjured images of horrific movies and brutal treatments, which frightened many at that era. However, something incredible transpired because Cavett dared to do it. When his wife entered the room after the treatment, he glanced across at her and said, "Look who's back among the living." It was as if he had flipped a switch. He compared it to magic thereafter. This aspect of his experience was not something he kept hidden. In fact, he spoke it frequently. He vowed to spread the word that electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, had restored his life. Cavett did not remain silent, but instead spoke up for the voiceless. He discussed the experience of depression in a 1993 video titled "A Patient's Perspective." His candid discussion of his treatments on Larry King Live drew millions of viewers and led to random strangers approaching him in the street. "Mister," one man remarked, "Cavett, you spared my father's life." At that moment, Cavett understood that opening up about his struggles may have been the most impactful decision he had ever made. Unless it helped individuals like that, he continued, fame was essentially pointless. Cavett kept working even while he was in the worst of pain. When he interviewed Joan Plowright and Laurence Olivier, he was emotionally drained. Somewhere else, he wished he could be. He claimed to be bewildered by the meaning of the cue cards he was glancing at. He believed that everyone could perceive his state of brokenness. Marlon Brando advised him to watch the interview again after a while. No indication of the internal conflict was visible to Cavett, who was taken aback. What artists depend on when everything else breaks apart is termed automatic pilot, as Brando stated. Cavett learned the hard way that even physicians may conceal signs of melancholy. He was once informed by one doctor, Kay Jameson, that she had been wildly insane and nevertheless fooled her co-workers. Silence may be just as harmful as that. Although Cavett was in agony, he was also a television legend. He received several nominations for Emmys and went on to win 3 of them. He was well liked for his charisma and brilliance. His legendary chats with Marlon Brando, Katharine Hepburn, and Mel Brooks went viral. For his work narrating audiobooks, he was even nominated for Grammys. One of the few truly remarkable conversationalists, he did more than host chat shows. A stroke he suffered in recent years presented Cavett with a new obstacle. Although it has affected his mobility, he now needs a cane or walker, he has spoken frankly about it, describing it as a wicked, wicked thing. Despite this, his intelligence remains intact. Not only has he not given up, but he is even considering writing again. Nothing has changed regarding his claim that writing makes him feel better. Cavett continued to draw in fans far into his 88th year. Video of his previous interviews began to go viral on the internet. Even among young individuals who were previously unfamiliar with him, his every word is now cherished. He even made an unexpected comeback as a nice guy by appearing in a music video. Throughout the Watergate and Vietnam years, PBS broadcasted specials highlighting his contributions. There was no end to his impact. Yale molded Cavett, and he never forgot it. So started the Great Depression. His acting career began there. That's when he started to develop into the kind of guy who would confront living legends with questions no one else dared to ask. His discussions on the anguish, politics, and cultural chasm in the United States continue to this day. Sincere, sorrowful, and bearing the marks of a man who has weathered storms few can fathom. That is how he talks.